WT slaying.
Shabbat Shalom, family. Shabbat Shalom. How y'all doing on this Sabbath day? So we're gonna continue on our journey of, the signs and the history and things that portend Ethiopia to be where I believe personally is the area where Jerusalem is located. Not that Lalibela is Jerusalem, but I believe that Jerusalem is somewhere north of there, probably somewhere in Gondar. Or a little north of Gondar. But I do believe that's the biblical land, not just like I said with Haggadah. Haggadah is the whole area that belongs to the 12 tribes from the Niger River all the way to the Nile. Ancient scholars refer to the Niger as, what is it? What was it called? Alala River. And that was referred to as Euphrates by ancient scholars, right? They don't teach you that today. So also, just to let you know, there's a lot of prophecies that's happening. And, as you all know, that stay up to date with us. And the Gentiles still are confused. They still confused about this whole thing. And I'm like, well, it is what it is. I think, I did a show back in the day called Flip the Script. And I'm thinking maybe in the future, if we have that much time left, I'm thinking in the future I might do a show that compares how the curses that were on us are coming off of us and going on them, right? As a nation. I'm not talking about individuals, but as a nation. So today we're going to talk about the Ark of the Covenant. And as many of you all know, many scholars believe that, let's say some scholars believe that it was in Ethiopia. I think it is, but, we'll discuss that as we go. All right. So this is not going to be like a long discussion, but we're going to talk about certain things. So the Kebra Nagast. The Kebra Nagast, Geese, or the Glory of the Kings, is a 14th century national epic account written in Geese by Eshek Nabura Id of Aksum. And remember, this is really only for those who've been following this teaching about Ethiopia, about the Promised Land, about Africa being the Promised Land, at least sub-Saharan Africa. It's not for anybody who just coming on here willy-nilly and just catching this particular broadcast, because you're going to be lost, right? You got to go back to 101, go back to the playlist on how we even get here. All right. So the text in its existing form is at least 700 years old, and is considered by many Ethiopian Christians to be an historically reliable work. It is considered to hold the genealogy of the Solomonic dynasty, which followed the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. It contains an account of how the Queen of Sheba, Queen Makeda of Ethiopia, met King Solomon, and how the Ark of the Covenant came to Ethiopia with their son Menelik. It also discusses the conversion of the Ethiopians from the worship of the sun, moon, and stars to that of the Lord God of Israel, as the Ethiopianist Edward Uhlendorf explained in the 1967 Schweik lectures. The Kebra Nagast is not merely a literary work, but it is the repository of Ethiopian national religious feelings. So as we go on, we're going to discuss how, in this particular Kebra Nagast, they talk about how Menelik, who was supposed to be the son of King Solomon and Queen of Sheba, stole the Ark of the Covenant and brought it to Ethiopia, or what we call Ethiopia. I don't believe that particular tale. I don't believe that Menelik. I don't know if Menelik is a descendant of King Solomon at all. I don't know that. But I don't believe the historical account of him stealing the Ark. One reason being is that the Ark of the Covenant was the most valued treasure that Israel ever had. I don't care if he is the son of the king. Ain't no way he was going to get out of there with the Ark and nobody know, right? Now, do I believe the Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia? Yes, I do. How it got there is the question, right? And remember, it wasn't called Ethiopia at the time, right? According to ancient history, right? We've discussed this in the past, that entire area, which is called Ethiopia today, was called Abyssinia. And before that, it was called Axum. And before that, it was called Demont. And that whole area had like 50 something different tribal groups. And I believe that some of what we call, let's say, Ethiopians, some that we call Ethiopians, or some of them may be Cushites, right? I believe that some of them, or many, are also Israelites. And I believe the majority of the Israelites are probably still in the Gondar province. And if you look at a lot of the people in the Gondar province, they're darker, look more like us, not so much Arabic looking. So some people are going to say, well, those the Falasha Jews, some people are going to say, well, the Falasha Jews are just Cushites. They're not Israelites. Well, some of them are Cushites and some are Israelites. See, that's the thing. When people make definitive statements, not knowing the history, they come up with these conclusions that they're all Cushites. Well, they all are not Cushites. Some are Cushites. But remember, as I mentioned, there's 54 different nations that live in that area. Now, we know from the scripture, there were many different tribal groups that lived in Canaan land. There were the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, all these other ites that lived in the area. Israel had to kick some of them out. Just as we saw in the Bible how, King David and them kicked out some of what we call Canaanites. Now, it's real interesting that when you look at history, you have who they call the oldest tribal group in Africa, right? And the oldest tribal group in Africa is called, what's their name? The Khoisan. And according to, Bantu history and Khoisan history, they were enemies. The Khoisan and the Bantus. And the Bantus fought and kicked the Khoisan out of, East Africa, because they say that the Khoisan was there as well, and South Africa as well. So, you have a similar history of the Bantu migration and their attacks against the Khoisan and kicking them out of the area because they were there first, according to history. And the Bantus took over. So, I mean, it lines up historically with the history of Israel and the Canaanites. But I digress. I'm not talking about that. But, I just wanted to throw that in, that a lot of stuff is lining up biblically, right? So let's continue. So this is a book. It's called The Queen of Sheba and Her Only Son Menelik, being the history of the departure of God and his Ark of the Covenant from Jerusalem to Ethiopia, and establishment of the religion of the Hebrews and the Solomonic line of kings in that country. And as you can see, it is published date was 1922. All right. So you can go, if you want to go look up this particular document, Butch E.A. Wallace, Ernest Alfred Wallace, You can go look this up if you like and read it. But this isn't what I'm using to make my case. But I want you to see the story that's being told, which I don't necessarily agree with 100%. All right. So it says the Queen of Sheba and her only son Menelik, being the history of the departure of God and his Ark of the Covenant from Jerusalem to Ethiopia, an establishment of the religion of the Hebrews and the Solomonic line of kings in that country, a complete translation of the Kebra Nagast, with the introduction by Sir E. A. Wallace Budge, M.A., Lit. D. Scholar of Christ College, Cambridge, and the Tharwit Hebrew Scholar, keeper of the Department of Egyptian and Assyrian Antiquities. Oops, I messed that up. Hold on, family. Let me go back. All right. Lost my spot. All right, back where we were. Okay. So the volume contains a complete English translation of the famous Ethiopian work, the Kebra Nagast, i.e. the glory of the kings of Ethiopia. This work has been held in peculiar honor in Abyssinia for several centuries. Now, notice he called it Abyssinia here, but in the beginning he was calling it Ethiopia, because Ethiopia during that time really was part of the continent of Africa, right? Or some say it was all of the continent of Africa. Some says it was just part of West Africa, things like that. So we need to make sure what we're talking about, even though it's talking about the current area we call Ethiopia today. It was called Abyssinia, before that Axum Empire, before that Demon. All right. So this work has been held in peculiar honor in Abyssinia for several centuries. And throughout that country, it has been and still is venerated by the people as containing the final proof of their descent from the Hebrew patriarchs and of the kinship of their kings of the Solomonic line with Christ, the Son of God. The importance of the book, both for the kings and the people of Abyssinia, is clearly shown by the letter that King John of Ethiopia wrote to late Lord Granville in August 1872. The king says there is a book called Kebra Nagast, which contains the law of the whole of Ethiopia and the names of the Shums, chiefs, and churches and provinces are in this book. I pray you find out who has got this book and send it to me. For in my country, my people will not obey my orders without it. The first summary of the contents of the Kebra Nagast was published by Bruce as far back as 1813. But little interest was roused by his somewhat bald precepts. And in spite of the labors of Praetorius Bezold and Hugues Leroux, the contents of the work are still practically unknown to the general reader in England. It is hoped that the translation given in the following pages will be of use to those who have not time or opportunity for perusing the Ethiopic original. The Kebra Nagast is a great storehouse of legends and traditions, some historical and some a purely folk lore character, derived from the Old Testament and the later rabbinic writings, and from Egyptian, both pagan and Christian, Arabian and Ethiopian sources. Of the early history of the compilation of its maker and of the subsequent editors, we know nothing, but the principal groundwork of its earliest form was the traditions that were current in Syria, Palestine, Arabia, Egypt during the first 4 centuries of the Christian era. Weighing carefully all that has been written by Dillman, Trump, Zotenberg, Wright, and Bezold, and taking into account the probabilities of the matter, it seems to me that we shall not be far wrong if we assign the composition of the earliest form of the Kebra Nagast to the 6th century AD. Its compiler was probably a Coptic priest, for the books he used were written that were accepted by the Coptic Church. Whether he lived in Egypt or in Axum or in some other part of Ethiopia matters little. But the colophons of the extant Ethiopic MSS of the Kebra Nagast suggest that he wrote in Coptic. In the succeeding century, probably as a result of the widespread conquest of Muhammad and his caliphs, and the Coptic text was in whole or part translated into Arabic, and in the process of translation, many additions were made to it, chiefly from Arabic sources. Last of all, this Arabic version was translated into Ethiopic, and proper names underwent curious transformations in the process. According to the colophons of the MSS, that's the text, in the British Museum, Oxford and Paris, the Arabic translation was made from the Coptic in the 409th year of Mercy, when Kebra Nagast, commonly known as Lalibela, was reigning over Ethiopia, i.e. between AD 1314 and 1344, and the same authorities say that the Ethiopic translation was made subsequently by one Isaac, of whom nothing is known, save that he was an enthusiastic Christian, visionary, and patriot. His knowledge of history and chronology was defective, and his comparative philology is unusually peculiar, even for the period in which he lived. In the colophons, Isaac says, I have toiled much for the glory of the kingdom of Ethiopia, and for the going forth manifestation of the heavenly Zion, and for the glory of the king of Ethiopia. These words throw some light upon Isaac's motive in translating the book and supply the reason for his devoted labor. He firmly believed that the lawful kings of Ethiopia were descended from Solomon, king of Israel, that the tabernacle of the law of God, i.e. the Ark of the Covenant, had been brought from Jerusalem to Axum by Menelik, Solomon's firstborn son, according to the Ethiopians, that the God of Israel had transferred his place of abode on earth from Jerusalem to Axum, the ecclesiastical and political capital of Ethiopia. The means employed by Menelik for obtaining possession of the Ark of the Covenant did not disturb Isaac's conscience in the least. Nay, he glorified in them. For manifestly Menelik was performing the will of God in removing the tabernacle of Zion from Jerusalem. God, according to Isaac, was satisfied that the Jews were unworthy to the custodians of the ark wherein his presence was, and the ark wished to depart. Now I want you to take note here. It says, God, in removing the tabernacle of Zion from Jerusalem, God, according to Isaac, was satisfied that the Jews were unworthy to be custodians of the ark wherein his presence was, and the ark wished to depart. Ethiopia had stretched out her hands to God, and he went to her with the ark to preside over Menelik's kingdom, which was established in accordance with the commands that he had given to Moses and the prophets and priests of Israel. Now, understand this. If any of you have been following, my particular teachings in trying to find out where Jerusalem is, we know historically from other sources that whole area that we call Axum, that whole area we call Abyssinia, that whole area in Gondar, all of that was occupied by Jews. And according to other historical accounts, there was a divide between the Jews. And some Jews followed their king, who converted to Christianity, and others stayed with the traditional, what we call Judaism today. And there was a battle, and the Jews lost, and they were pushed back to close to the mountains of what's the name of the Solomon Mountains. So understand that according to other texts, that whole area was occupied by Jews, right? Not saying that there weren't other nations, because we know from even those other books that there were 52 other nations in that area. All right, so here they're saying that they took the ark from the Jews and gave it to the Ethiopians. No. See, that don't make sense when you look at the other historical accounts, because the people who were there were Jews. Even the Ethiopian Christians, many of them today, right, who they call Orthodox, they are descendants of Jews. Not all of them, right? I'm talking about bloodline. Not all of them, but many of them were descendants of Jews, right? So understand this, that when you look at that area, right, that area had 52 different people. Now we know, according to Eldad the Danite, many of the different tribes were there. Ashur was there, Dan was there, right? Who else was there? Many of the tribes were there. I'm losing my thoughts right now. I'm a little hot right now. But understand that many different groups were in that area. Just as we see today, there's still over 52 different tribes in that area, right? So understand when we look at what they're saying here, they're inferring that those people there were already Christians and that they got their hands on it, on the ark, because God gave it to them and took it from the Jews. My case that I'm making is that those people who are there are Jews, most of them. Most of the people there are Jews, and they had the Ark of the Covenant with them. I believe that that area we call Ethiopia is the land where Christ and the apostles lived, not in the Middle East. And if you don't believe me, just go back and look at my other shows for my reasoning behind that. Anybody who comes up behind me, you ain't getting the whole picture. Thank you for the gift, Michael. So understand, according to the way I see it, they are twisting it, because understand, they converted to Christianity. Now, what form of Christianity did they convert to? It was either Coptic or Catholic, right? Now, there's a huge Catholic influence, because we see in some older writings that the king of Ethiopia was writing back to Rome as well. And he was also writing to Portugal as well. So we need to know the context that's happening here, right? So let me continue. It will be remembered that the line of kings founded by Solomon continued to reign even after the Ethiopians became Christians. See right there, that's a bad statement. Even after the Ethiopians became Christians. Well, who were the Ethiopians? The Ethiopians were Jews, different tribes of Jews. A whole bunch of the tribe of Dan was in that area. So to say that the Ethiopians, that's a faux pas. So the Ethiopians became Christians under the teaching of Frumentus and Odysseus, the slaves of the merchant Meropius, and that the line continued unbroken until the 10th century of our era. Isaac knew that God then permitted the line to be broken and allowed the Zed kings to reign over Ethiopia until the reign of Yakuno Amlak, who restored the Solomonic line in 1270, and he makes no attempt to justify God's actions in this matter or to explain it. Now, here's what I think happened. In order to hide the true location of Jerusalem, or the Holy Land, right, and to make it look like it's the Middle East, they had to reframe the history, right? So here they reframe the history. So instead of the ark being there with the Jews, right, already who are already living in the land, instead of the ark being in that land, no, it had to be brought over. In some kind of way, God brought the ark over to Ethiopia, and the Christians took it and put it in a Christian church. But all of you all who have been following me understand that the history shows that the people who were in that land were Jews, and there was a fight, there was a war, and the Axum king, who was a Jew, fought against the other Jews and tried to convert them to Christianity. Y'all know that history. We've been over it already, right? And so you got some people who are going to say, well, these are Cushites. Everybody not Cushites. Everybody ain't Canaanites. They all lived amongst each other. Don't you know your Bible? Don't you know that Israel lived amongst the Canaanites, the Cushites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites? Come on. Y'all got to know the Bible first before you know what's going on, and that there's a bunch of people who live in the land that we call Israel. Who you think Israel was overthrowing all these times? Who you think they were fighting all this time? People who lived in the surrounding areas. We learn, however, from the first section of the colophon that he wondered why God had neglected to have the Arabic version of the Kebra Nagast translated into the speech of Abyssinia at an earlier date, and why Abu Is and Abu Faraj, who made the Arabic translation from the Coptic, did not make a rendering into the Ethiopic also. See, this is still this is still faulty reasoning here, the way he words this, right? Where was I? Yeah, into the Ethiopic also. Understand, it was Axum Empire, It wasn't called Ethiopia till 1921. In the explanation which he attempts to give, he reminds us that the Arabic translation appeared whilst the Zayed kings were still reigning. And the Kebra Nagast was written to glorify the Solomonic line of kings, and its editors and translators regarded the Zayed kings not only as non-Israelites, but as transgressors of the law. The appearance of a translation of it in the vernacular whilst the Zayed were still on the throne would be followed by the torture and death of its producers and the destruction of their work. I'm going to stop right there. But basically, the whole idea, the reason why I want to show this one is that they're making the case that God had cut off Israel, right? And gave the ark to the Christians. Now, isn't that the same thing we heard with Portugal and Spain, that God cut off the Israelites, right? They're under judgment. They're under curse. God has done away with Israel. They don't matter no more, right? And that's why the church took over. And that's why we see this bias here towards the church. This bias here is that God was finished with the Israelites and gave the ark to the church. Now, understand, many of these people who were part of the Ethiopic church were former Jews themselves. Yes, some were Cushites, but many were former Jews themselves. Okay, and that's why they had the Ark of the Covenant. So, do I believe that the Ethiopians have the Ark or had the Ark of the Covenant? Yes, I do. Do I believe that Menelik brought it there? No, I do not. And I'm going to show you why. So let's continue. Thank you, JSBS, for the gift. So, Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. The Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion is an Ethiopian Orthodox Tawahedo. That's the religion, Tawahedo Church in Ethiopia. It is claimed to contain the Ark of the Covenant. It is located in the town of Axum, Tigray. The original church is believed to have been built during the reign of Ezana, the first Christian ruler of the kingdom of Axum. See, they keep referring to Ethiopia as Ethiopia, but it was the kingdom of Axum. Present-day Eritrea in Ethiopia during the 4th century AD, and has been rebuilt several times since then. So what I want to emphasize here is that according to history and folklore, the Ark of the Covenant resided in this church, the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. Now, here's the thing. Understand that when we see this Church of Our Lady, we see a Catholic influence. We see a Catholic influence. We see an Orthodox influence, right? Church of Our Lady. We don't see the traditional Israelite influence. Why? Because they converted to Christianity. But what form of Christianity did they convert to? They converted to either a Christian influence one, or a Catholic influence one, or Orthodox. It appears to me it's either Egyptian Orthodox or Catholic, which is not too far away from each other, right? So, do I believe they had the Ark of the Covenant? Yes, I do. And I'm explaining why. But let's read this from the Smithsonian so we could get another view of the supposed history. And I'm going to tell you again, many of you who haven't watched the other videos are lost. So don't tell me about your opinions about them being Cushites and Canaanites or whatever you say they are. You need to go watch the other videos, otherwise don't bother me. All right. So this is from the Smithsonian magazine, Keepers of the Lost Ark. Christians in Ethiopia have long claimed to have the Ark of the Covenant. Our report investigated. Now, remember, these Christians were Jews at one time. Not all of them, but many of them were Jews. Eldad and many other historians confirm that. We've been through the history of those people. We've been through the history of the war that they fought against each other when their king converted to Christianity. They shall make an ark of acacia wood, God commanded Moses in the book of Exodus, after delivering the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. And so the Israelites built an ark or chest, gilding it inside and out, and into this chest Moses placed stone tablets inscribed with the 10 Commandments, as given to him on Mount Sinai. Thus, the ark was worshipped by the Israelites as the embodiment of God himself, writes Graham Hancock, in the sign and seal. Biblical and other archaic sources speak of the ark blazing with fire and light, stopping rivers, blasting whole armies. Steven Spielberg films Raiders of the Lost Ark provides a special effects approximation. Now, understand, Graham Hancock said that the ark came from Jerusalem over there in the Middle East and came through Elephantine Island and made its way over there to Ethiopia. I disagree with that. I believe that the ark was always there because that is the land where Jerusalem is. You don't have to agree. All right. I'm just showing you how I get to my reasoning. According to the first book of Kings, Kings was venerated there during Solomon's reign and beyond. Then it vanished. Much of Jewish tradition holds that it disappeared before or while the Babylonians sacked the temple in Jerusalem in 586 BC. But through the centuries, Ethiopian Christians have claimed that the ark rests in a chapel in the small town of Axum. That's the church we just saw, the Church of Our Lady of Mary, in their country's northern highlands. It arrived nearly 3,000 years ago, they say, and has been guarded by a succession of virgin monks who once anointed or forbidden to set foot outside the chapel grounds until they died. Now, look, here's the thing. Understand that these people were not Christians for 3,000 years. The Jewish Ethiopians, if you want to call them that, the Jewish people who lived in that land were there for over 2,000 years, according to their history. And according to other scholars, the ones who talk about the war between the Jews when they fought, when they king converted to Christianity and created the Axum Empire. So they were not watching over no ark as Christians for 3,000 years. They weren't Christians for 3,000 years. One of the first things that caught my eye in Addis Ababa, the country's capital, was an enormous concrete pillar topped by a giant red star, the sort of monument to communism still visible in Pyongyang. The North Koreans built this one as a gift for the Derg, the Marxist regime that ruled Ethiopia from 1974 to 91. The country is now governed by an elected parliament and prime minister. In a campaign that Derg officials named the Red Terror, they slaughtered their political enemies. Estimates range from several thousand to more than 1 million. The most prominent of their victims were Emperor Haile Selassie, whose death under circumstances that remain contested was announced in 75. He was the last emperor of Ethiopia, and he claimed the 225th monarch descended from Menelik, the ruler believed responsible for Ethiopia's possession of the Ark of the Covenant in the 10th century. The story is told in the Kebra Nagast, Glory of the Kings, Ethiopia's chronicle of its royal line. The Queen of Sheba, one of its first rulers, traveled to Jerusalem to partake of Solomon's wisdom on her way home. She bore Solomon's son, Menelik. Later, Menelik went to visit his father, and on his return journey was accompanied by the firstborn sons of some Israelite nobles who, unbeknown to Menelik, stole the ark and carried it with them to Ethiopia. When Menelik learned of the theft, he reasoned that since the ark's frightful powers had not destroyed his retinue, it must be God's will that it remains with him. Now, here's what I think, my opinion. I believe the reason why they came up with this story of Menelik, right, and that it came over from the Middle East and it came over through Elephantine and they brought it to Ethiopia, right, who was supposed to be a bunch of Christians, converted Christians, right, and not Jews themselves, because they don't want you to realize that that land is the true land of where the apostles were, that it was the true land where Yahshua walked, that it was the true land where the real Jerusalem is. And I have my reasons for it, and for those who don't know, need to go watch it, right? So understand that if they said anything else, right, people wouldn't believe that that land, was just part of the Axum Empire. They would wonder, why was the ark there to begin with? How did the ark get there? They had to have a reason, because understand, the people in Ethiopia, who we call Ethiopians today, They would have processions and festivals where they would carry the ark out. It would be covered, but they would carry the ark out, and people would wonder how they got their hands on the ark, because no one was supposed to know that Jews were living there. No one is supposed to know that they were originally Jews, many of them who converted to Christianity. So if you told that story that they had the ark, well, the question would be how they got it. Well, that's why they come up with the Abimelech thing. And it's also good for them to show the ruling dynasty that they descend from King Solomon. But I don't believe that whole Menelik story. It don't make sense. I believe they have it because many of them are descendants of the original Jews. And I'm going to show you why I still believe that. Many historians, including Richard Pankhurst, a British-born scholar who has lived in Ethiopia for almost 50 years, date the Kebra Nagast manuscript to the 14th century AD. It was written, they say, to validate the claim of Menelik's descendants that their right to rule was God-given, based on an unbroken succession from Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. But the Ethiopian faithful say the chronicles were copied from a 4th century Coptic manuscript that was in turn based on a far earlier account. This lineage remains so important to them that it was written into Selassie's 2 imperial constitutions in 1931 and 1955. Before leaving Addis Ababa for Axum, I went to the offices of His Holiness Abuna Paulos, Patriarch of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which has some 40 million adherents worldwide, to ask about Ethiopia's claim to have the Ark of the Covenant. Paulos holds a PhD in theology from Princeton University, and before he was installed as patriarch in 92, he was a parish priest in Manhattan, gripping a golden staff, wearing a golden icon depicting the Madonna cradling the infant Jesus, and seated on what looked like a golden throne, he oozed power and patronage. We've had 1,000 years of Judaism followed by 2,000 years of Christianity. Listen to that. We've had 1,000 years of Judaism followed by 2,000 years of Christianity. See, they were not Ethiopian Christians for 3,000 years. So he said we had 1,000 years of Judaism followed by 2,000 years of Christianity, and that's why our religion is rooted in the Old Testament, he told me. We follow the same dietary laws as Judaism. Why? Because they were descendants of Jews, many of them. As set out in Leviticus, meaning that his followers keep kosher, even though they are Christians. Parents circumcise their baby boys as a religious duty. We often give Old Testament names to our boys, and many villagers in the countryside still hold Saturday sacred as the Sabbath. Is this tradition linked to the church's claim to hold the Ark, which Ethiopians call Tabotas Sayin, or the Ark of Zion? It's no claim, it's the truth, Paulos answered. Queen of Sheba visited King Solomon in Jerusalem 3,000 years ago, and the son she bore him, Menelik, at the age of 20, visited Jerusalem, from where he brought the Ark of the Covenant back to Axum. It's been in Ethiopia ever since. See, once again, I don't believe that the whole idea of Ethiopia, right, should be used, because in context, it wasn't called Ethiopia, it was called Axum. Understand that the claim that Menelik came back with the Ark of the Covenant has not been proven, let alone that he existed as Solomon's son. But I'm not going to fight that. I'm not going to debate that. But understand that they do have, or in my opinion, they did have or do have the Ark. I don't know if they still have it, but they did, right? And many of the other artifacts of the temple. And we're going to talk about that. I asked if the ark in Ethiopia resembles the one described in the Bible, almost 4 feet long, just over 2 feet high and wide, surmounted by 2 winged cherubims facing each other across its heavy lid, forming the mercy seat or footstool of the throne of God. Paulos shrugged. Can you believe that even though I'm head of the Ethiopian church, I'm still forbidden from seeing it, he said. The guardian of the ark is the only person on earth who has that peerless honor. He also mentioned that the ark had not been held continuously at Axum since Menelik's time, adding that some monks hid it for 400 years to keep it out of invaders' hands. Their monastery still stood, he said, on the island of Lake Tana. It was about 200 miles northwest of the Way of Axum. Understand this. This is very important. Their monastery still stood on the island of Lake Tana. All right, that's important. Right? Because if they have other artifacts, right, then they probably more than likely had the Ark of the Covenant. Ethiopia is landlocked, but Lake Tana is an inland sea. It covers 1,400 square miles and is the source of the Blue Nile, which weaves its muddy way 3,245 miles through Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt to the Mediterranean. At the outlet where the water begins its journey, fishermen drop lines from primitive papyrus boats like those the Egyptians used in the Pharaoh's day. I glimpsed them through an eerie dawn mist as I boarded a powerboat headed to Tana Kirkos. That's the name of the island, Tana Kirkos, the island of the Ark, right? So it was called Tana Kirkos, the island of the Ark. So my case is that they did have the Ark, and I'm going to show you why I believe they had the Ark, as well as other temple items. Slowly, the boatman treaded his way through a maze of tree-covered islands so dense that he began to wonder aloud whether we were lost. When after 2 hours, we suddenly confronted a rock wall about 30 yards high and more than 100 yards long, he cried, Tana Kirkos, with obvious relief. A fish eagle circled and squawked as a barefoot monk clad in a patch yellow robe scurried down a pathway cut into the rock and peered into our boat. He's making sure there are no women aboard, my translator said. The monk introduced himself as Abba, or Father, Hali Mikael. There are 125 monks on the island, and many are novices, he said. Women have been banned for centuries because the sight of them might fire the young monks' passions. Another monk, Abba Gibri Mariam, joined us. He too wore a patch yellow robe, plus a white pillbox turban. A rough-hewn wooden cross hung from his neck, and he carried a silver staff topped by a cross. In response to my questioning, he elaborated on what Abuna Palos had told me. The Ark came here from Axum for safekeeping from enemies well before Jesus was born, because our people followed the Jewish religion then. See, his people followed the Jewish religion then. Many of them were Jews. Many Jews lived in that area. It all lines up with all the history we talked about before. All right. But when King Ezana ruled in Axum 1,600 years ago, he took the Ark back to Axum. Ezana's kingdom extended across the Red Sea into the Arabian Peninsula. He converted to Christianity around 330 and became hugely influential in spreading the faith. This is why you have this whole Catholic Christianity influence in Ethiopia today. They, as you saw, they followed the Jewish religion before. Then Abba Gibri added, the baby Jesus and Mary spent 10 days here during their long exile from Israel. It was after King Herod ordered the death of all boys under the age of 2 in Bethlehem. He said, would you like to see the place where they often sat? See, my case is that Jerusalem is further north. Just my opinion, I can't prove it. But that Jerusalem is further north near Gondar, right? Over there near the Solomon Mountains. I followed him up a wooden path and onto a ridge where a pair of young monks were standing by a small shrine. Their eyes closed in prayer. Abba Gibri pointed to the shrine. That's where Jesus and Mary sat each day while they were here. What proof do you have that they came here? I asked. He looked at me with what appeared to be tender sympathy and said, we don't need proof because it's a fact. The monks here have passed this down for centuries. My case is this is the land where Jesus lived. This is the land of the biblical patriarchs. Okay. Later, Andrew Waring, a religious scholar at the University of Sydney, told me that the journey by Jesus, Mary, and Joseph is mentioned in only a few lines in the book of Matthew, and he gives scant detail, though he does state they fled into Egypt. Like his former parent institution, the Orthodox Coptic Church, the Ethiopian Orthodox faith holds that the family spent 4 years in Western Egypt, Waring said, in the Nile Valley and the Nile Delta before returning home. But Western Egypt is over 1,000 miles northwest of Lake Tana. Could Jesus, Mary, and Joseph have traveled to Tana Kirkos? There's no way to know. As I state, I don't believe the Middle East is the true land of Israel. I don't believe the Jerusalem in the Middle East is the true Jerusalem. I believe it's all fake. I believe this is the true land area. On the way back to the boat, it don't matter what I think, right? I mean, we'll find out soon anyway. On the way back to the boat, we passed small log huts with canonical thatched roofs. The monk cells. Abba Gibri entered one and pulled from the shadows an ancient bronze tray set on a stand. He said Menelik brought it from Jerusalem to Axum along with the ark, right? So he said that Menelik brought it from Jerusalem to Axum along with the ark. So whether or not Menelik brought it or not, they had this ancient bronze tray set, all right? They had that in their possession. And if they had that in their possession, they more than likely had the ark in their possession as well. The Jerusalem temple priests used this tray to collect and stir the sacrificial animal's blood, Abba Gibri went on. When I checked later with Pankhurst, the historian said the tray which he had seen on an earlier visit was probably associated with Judaic rituals in Ethiopia's pre-Christian era. What? When they were following the Jewish religion. Lake Tana, he said, was a stronghold of Judaism. A stronghold of Judaism. Whether or not you believe some of them people Cushites, it was a stronghold of Judaism. Finally, Abba Gibri led me to an old church built from wood and rock in the traditional Ethiopian style, circular with a narrow walkway hugging the outer wall. Inside was the Makdas, a holy of holies, an inner sanctum shielded by brocade curtains and open only to senior priests. That's where we keep our tablets, he said. The tablets, pronounced tabats, are replicas of the tablets in the ark, and every church in Ethiopia has a set kept in its own holy of holies. It's the tablets that consecrate a church, and without them, it's as holy as a donkey stable. Abba Gibri said, even January 19 on Timkat, or the Feast of the Epiphany, and I've showed you videos of that, the tablets from churches all over Ethiopia are paraded through the streets. The most sacred ceremony occurs at Gondar, he went on, naming a city in the highlands just north of Lake Tana. To understand our deep reverence for the ark, you should go there. Gondar, population 160,000, spreads across a series of hills and valleys more than 7,000 feet above sea level. On the advice of a friendly cleric, I sought out Archbishop Andreas, the local leader of the Ethiopian church. As Andreas ushered me into a simple room in his office, I saw that he had splendidly framed and sunken cheeks of an ascetic. Despite his high position, he was dressed like a monk in a worn yellow robe, and he held a simple cross carved from wood. See, now they have this huge Catholic influence or Christian influence, however you want to call it, is very Catholic-like, right? I asked if he knew of any evidence that the ark had come to Ethiopia with Menelik. These stories were handed down through generations by our church leaders, and we believe them to be historical facts, he told me in a whisper. That's why we keep tablets in every church in Ethiopia. At noon the next day, Andreas in a black robe and black turban emerged from a church on a slope above Gondar and into a crowd of several hundred people. A dozen priests, deacons, acolytes, clad in brocade robes in maroon, ivory, gold, and blue, joined him to form a protective huddle around a bearded priest, wearing a scarlet robe and a golden turban. On his head, the priest carried the tablets, wrapped in ebony velvet embroidered in gold. Catching the sight of sacred bundle, hundreds of women in the crowd began ululating, making a sing-song wail with their tongues, as many Ethiopian women do at moments of intense emotion. As the clerics began to walk down a rocky pathway toward a piazza at the center of town, they were hemmed in by perhaps 1,000 more chanting and ululating devotees. At the piazza, the procession joined clerics carrying tablets from 7 other churches. Together, they set off farther downhill, with the trailing throng swelling in the thousands and thousands more lining the road. About 5 miles later, the priest stopped beside a pool of murky water in the park. All afternoon and through the night, the priest chanted hymns from the tablets surrounded by worshipers. Then, prompted by glimmers of light sneaking into the morning sky, Archbishop Andreas led the clerics to celebrate the baptism of Jesus by playfully splashing one another with the pool's water. Now, we looked at this in the last video I did on Ethiopia, where we talk about this, the celebration of Timkat, which is the Epiphany, right? The Timkat celebrations were to continue for 3 more days, with prayers and masses, after which the tablets will be returned to the churches where they were kept. I was more eager than ever to locate the original ark, so I headed to Axum, about 200 miles northeast. Just outside of Gondar, my car passed Waleka village, where a mud hut synagogue bore a Star of David on the roof, a relic of Jewish life in the region that endured for as long as 4 millennia until the 90s. That was when the last of Bet Israel Jews, also known as the Falasha, the Amharic word for stranger, were evacuated to Israel in the face of persecution by the Derg. The road degenerated into a rutted, rocky pathway that twisted around the hillside, and our SUV struggled to exceed 10 miles per hour. I reached the Axum in darkness and shared the hotel dining room with UN peacekeepers from Uruguay and Jordan, who told me they were monitoring a stretch of Ethiopia-Eritrea border about an hour's drive. The latest UN bulletin described the area as volatile and tense. The next day was hot and dusty, except for the occasional camel and his driver. Axum streets were nearly empty. We weren't far from the desert, which extends eastward into Eritrea, Djibouti. So I'm not going to read the rest of it because it's pretty long. But understand, my point is that when you look at what we looked at in the past, we look at the historical accounts, and this even confirms that they were Jews before they converted, many of them, before they converted to Christianity. So if they were Jews, and there were other tribes, according to Eldad the Danite and other, Jewish people. If those people were in the area, and it's confirmed here that they practiced Judaism, then it's no wonder that they had some of those things. Right now, when you read a lot of these modern books and information on it, they try to emphasize their Christian side. They try to emphasize the fact that they were Christian converts, and so God did away with the Jews and gave them the ark. No, they were Jews already. They weren't Jews because of Menelik. They're because according to Eldad, the Danite, the tribe of Dan was there, Asher was there, right? Many other Jewish tribes were in that area, according to Eldad himself, right? So if that's the case, then they brought some of their culture with them, right? Which we see, right? Which is why they still follow the laws, right? They also not only practiced Judaism, not only did they circumcise, they also had many of the relics. And some of those relics were hidden on the island called Lake Tana, right? Now, according to them, if the Ark of the Covenant was on Lake Tana, and there were many other relics with them on Lake Tana, if we can find that they had actual relics that we see today, but not the ark, then I can believe that they probably had the ark too. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna share this last thing with you all. You know, it's a clip basically from a show. I forgot which one it was. Some of you all probably saw it before. That showed that they had many of the temple artifacts, and these temple artifacts were held on Lake Tana. And if those artifacts were there, then it's more than likely that they also had the ark as they claim. So let's look at this right quick. Let me know if you have a problem listening to it or not. All right, let's start this over. All right. Hold on, I'm not hearing anything. Let's see.
Taken with them to Axum. They were actually abandoned and left with the monks on Tanakirkos. Okay, the monks have brought this bronze, very corroded bowl out. They call this a gomer. They say that they put blood in this during the blood sacrifices and that someone would stir it to keep the blood from coagulating. It was used in the blood sacrificial services. They tell me that this bowl came from Solomon's temple. That's true. This would be the only known implement from Solomon's temple to exist in the world today that can be verifiable.
The monks brought out a pair of ancient meat forks and said they came from Solomon's temple with the ark. The monks explained that these meat forks were used to put large pieces of meat on the fire in the burnt offering sacrifice. Each fork was topped with the budding almond symbol, one Bob had seen at other sites in Ethiopia.
And this stand is extremely old, very, very heavy. This Gomer fits on the top of this stand like this. You can see it's bent from time and wear and just sheer fatigue. But they claim when they became Christian that they did not need these implements any longer because they were involving the blood sacrifice. So with Jesus Christ offering the blood of sacrifice, these were no longer needed in their ceremonies. So they were left with the monks. Where did they get them? They had virtually no metal on the island and no ability to manufacture these items, and plus the items were extremely old in antiquity. So where did these implements come from? Where did they get them? They had virtually no metal on the island and no ability to manufacture these items, and plus the items were extremely old in antiquity. So where did these implements come from? These monks said that I was the first one to be shown these implements, because if these ever proved to be articles that were from Solomon's temple, these photographs will be the only ones in existence to date.
The monks claimed that they possessed more than just the Ark of the Covenant. With the Ark came other implements for worship from Solomon's temple. The monks agreed to show these items and remove them from the temple treasury. This crown was said to be worn by the chief musician, one of 3 musicians who traveled in procession with the Ark.
And then these monks entered the temple treasury and they brought out these hammered silver trumpets, very long trumpets and very ancient trumpets. And we see that in Scripture that it says in Numbers 10, verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, make 2 trumpets of hammered silver and use them for calling the community together and for having the camp set out.
These discoveries seem remarkable. But were these trumpets really relics from Old Testament times? Could they be identified as trumpets from Solomon's temple in ancient Israel? An important clue sits nearly 3,000 miles away in Rome, an arch dedicated to the Roman Emperor Titus. In this parade of victory, trumpets are seen, and they are clearly from ancient Israel.
When Titus sacked Jerusalem, he brought these trumpets back and paraded them through the streets of Rome. And a contemporary, an eyewitness that actually saw the trumpets, chiseled these trumpets on the archway in Rome at the Ark of Titus. And these trumpets seem to match perfectly with the trumpets that were brought from the treasury at St. Mary's of Zion. And these trumpets seem to match perfectly with the trumpets that were brought from the treasury at St. Mary's of Zion. And these trumpets seem to match perfectly with the trumpets that were brought from the treasury at St. Mary's of Zion. And these trumpets seem to match perfectly with the trumpets that were brought from the treasury at St. Mary's of Zion.
So, family, we have all of these historical accounts, right? We have their traditions. We have these items from the temple, you know, the silver trumpets, you know, the copper ladle or whatever you call it that held the blood. So why would Menelik bring all of that along with the Ark of the Covenant? Why would Menelik bring all of that unless he was going to try to build a new temple? Why would he need the shofar? Why would he need the laders? Why would he need the meat sticks? Right? Unless that is the true land, as I contend, the true land where Jerusalem is located. I'm not saying like Lalibela is Jerusalem. I'm saying Jerusalem is near that area. That is the land I believe that the apostles and Yahshua walked. Right? I can't prove it. It's all circumstantial evidence. But here's the other thing that's interesting. So, you know, someone, you know, posted, well, why did they have crosses on those meat sticks? Well, see, that's how we look at it. we look at it as crosses. But understand, me being from New Orleans, it looks like a fleur-de-lis. And isn't it interesting, though, that the fleur-de-lis was used to brand slaves? Why would they use the fleur-de-lis to brand slaves? Because it denoted, in my opinion, maybe that they were Jews. We know the whole history now, right? We traced our history from Portugal and Spain. We traced our way all the way to Sao Tome. We traced our way to Angola. We traced our way all the way to the Americas and the islands. And now we have these artifacts that they produce, that they have shown, that they have verified that they have. And they state that they also have the Ark of the Covenant. My contention is that they probably do or had the Ark of the Covenant. And if that's the case, I don't believe that Menelik brought it there. I believe that a lot of these people who are monks are probably Levitical priests who converted to Christianity. If you notice that the people who were the monks, they don't look like the Ethiopians you see in charge today. If you saw in his video, the monks, they look like our people. They look Bantu-ish. If you don't, go back and rewind it and look at the monks. They look more like us than half Arab and half African. So my point is, if they have the shofar, silver shofar, or trumpet as they call it, if they have the later that held the blood, if they had the meat sticks and all these things, then they more than likely had the Ark of the Covenant. And if they had the Ark of the Covenant, there's a reason why Jews would have the Ark of the Covenant. I guarantee you, if we can go in to the inner chambers, we will find out that those monks are descendants of the Levitical priesthood. I guarantee you the monk that's watching the ark is a descendant of the Levitical priesthood. They just became believers under the Axum king. So we got to understand that, all of this is speculation, because we ain't gonna know till we go. But understand that I'm just sharing what I see. And I believe that's the land. Now, is that important today? Does it really matter if that's the land or not? Well, according to the scriptures, after we leave here, from being scattered amongst the nations as slaves, we're going to go back to the land we were taken from. We're going to go back into the wilderness of the people. And then after 3.5 years, we go to the land of Jerusalem. Understand, in my opinion, and like I say, all of this is my opinion, eat the meat, spit out the bones. I don't think there's much time left. Luke 21:28-32. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. And he spake to them a parable. Behold, the fig tree and all the trees, when they now shoot forth, ye see, know of your own self that summer is now near at hand. So likewise, ye, when ye see these things come to pass, know what? That the kingdom of God is near at hand. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass away till all be fulfilled. Are we not seeing the signs? Are they not here? Are not things being revealed along with the awakening of the Israelites? So when you see these signs, know what? That the kingdom of God is near. Daniel 2:44. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven, what? Will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. What did it say? In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will what? Set up a kingdom. Luke told us that when we see these things come to pass, the kingdom is near. Here it says, God will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. What? When those 10 toes come to power. So that's all I wanted to share with your family. Eat the meat, spit out the bones. I know I'm going to get some haters. I always do. Don't tell me nothing about the United States being our land. I'm not going to listen to that foolishness. Don't tell me we Native American Indians. I'm not going to buy that foolishness. Don't tell me nothing about the Book of Mormon. I'm not going to buy that foolishness. You don't understand, one guy told me. You don't understand, Yakoba. You don't get it. You do all that research. You don't understand that America's our home. This is where we from. All I could do is laugh. But I want to thank y'all. I want to thank all of the Super Chat supporters. Thank you for the gifts. I want to thank all of the Cash App supporters. I want to also thank our Patreons. And thank y'all for listening. Even if you can't give, please share the video. Give likes if you like it. Eat the meat, spit out the bones. Peace and blessings, Israel. Your captivity is ending. Make sure you support our Dry Bones Project.